you can do to repair a damaged GPA. And presenting for us today is Joanne Snapp. She's the Director of Health Professions Advising at UC Davis, where she served thousands of pre-health students for the past 6 years. Prior to moving to California, she served as the Director of Admissions at an allopathic medical school in New York. She has also worked at a nursing college and a pediatric medical school advising students. Her background is in education, where she has focused her graduate research on retention strategies for underrepresented and first-generation college students, specifically examining institutional barriers that contribute to the academic challenges many face. Her most recent project is creating the UC Davis Health Professions Post-Bac program, where she intends to employ many of the strategies she has studied for years to help students achieve their dreams. We are really fortunate to have you, Joanne, and we're so grateful that you're here to share your expertise with our participants today. So please take it away.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and be talking about this topic. This is a topic that I talk about all the time with my own students at UC Davis, and so I'm really excited to share some of my thoughts on this. So we're going to jump right in. I see there are about 50 people in the room, and all of you want to be doctors or other health professionals. I'm assuming doctors, that's the title of the conference. So this is such an important topic, and I would say I spend at least half of my day, every day, talking about overcoming academic challenges in the pursuit of medical school. And I'm pulling the information, everything I'm going to share with you today is being pulled from my background, having served as the Director of Admissions at a medical school and having been trained on holistic advising by the AMC, and then turning around and training an admissions committee on how to utilize holistic advice or holistic admissions at the medical school. I kind of stole the concept when I came over to the advising side, and I've been employing what we call holistic advising in the same fashion in terms of how do we get people to be competitive for medical school beyond just the academics. And so I'm going to talk a little bit first about just sort of everything that they're looking for beyond the academics, because I have students, and I've seen this for years, even in the director role, the admissions role. Your metrics, I call metrics, your MCAT and your GPA, your metrics are not the only thing that are going to get you in and are not the only thing that could keep you out. Your numbers alone are only one, I don't want to say tiny portion, I mean, it's a pretty significant thing, but it's only one thing, one part of your application. And so much of the other stuff that's in your application, so much of the who you are and everything about you actually has more power in this process than two little numbers. And I'll hopefully, I don't have much time today, hopefully I'll be able to unpack some of that for you today. So, in an interactive session, I'm usually very interactive. I love seeing people's faces and asking questions. I'll try to do my best without being able to do that. So these are rhetorical questions. So what do you think medical schools are really looking for? I told you I stole the holistic admissions model, and maybe some other people today have already talked to you about this. This is the model that on the medical school side, this is what the model, we call it the EAM model, that they use to screen applications. And so if you ever talk to an admissions person, I think you're going to hear from one after this, you will always hear admissions people say, we take a holistic approach to your application. Well, what does that mean? Oh, they're going to look at everything in your app, right? Yeah, of course they're going to look at everything in your app. You have a 30-page app, and they're going to spend about 5 minutes reading through the whole application as fast as they can, because they have thousands of applications. And so the amount of time that it takes someone to look at two numbers, your MCAT and your GPA, how many seconds would it take someone to look at those two numbers and say, well, that person can do it. Like they're good enough, right? They can handle the curriculum. some people will say like 5 seconds. Well, actually it's like half a second, right? Our mind is amazing. We can look at those two numbers. We can see a 507 MCAT and a 3.2 GPA, and we can draw a conclusion very quickly that they're going to be just fine, that they can handle the medical school curriculum. What a school sets as their bar in terms of what those numbers are going to drastically vary by school. So when you're looking at one school, they might have their bar set a little bit higher. Maybe they've determined that a certain number hits, is more successful. A lot of schools, most schools, have that bar set at around 3.0 and 500 as an MCAT. That's like the bar, right? The minimum. Can people get in below the bar? Absolutely. People get into med school below the bar. Is it really easy? Is it common? Does it happen all the time? Not usually. So when we're talking about minimums or bars, I want to set a base as saying that most schools have a 3.0 and a 500 as like a base. So as we start talking about this, and we're going to talk a lot about where are you and how do we build that if you're not at that bar, or what if you're at that bar, or what if you're just right above that bar. So we'll talk about all of that today. But what I really want to stress to you is that number alone is not ever going to be enough to focus on when it comes to being successful at getting into medical school. That alone cannot be the only thing that you worry about or that you focus on this journey. If it is, I'm here to disappoint you and telling you that I have seen people who have 3.7s, 3.9 GPAs, 516 MCATs, who do not get into any medical school. None. And I've seen this year after year, both in the admissions role and in the advising role. People who have really high metrics do not always get into medical school. I promise you. Now, you might be thinking, yeah, right. Like, why would that be? Is it because they didn't do enough experiences? In my experience, really smart people, they typically know what they need to do to be successful and get into med school. So really, really smart people, they know they have to check off all those boxes, right? They got to do research and shadowing and volunteering. They know all that stuff. So they usually do all that stuff. It's not usually the experiences that are the problem. If someone has really high grades and really high experiences, it's not usually that keeps them out. So we look at this pie, and there are 3 things med schools want. So when they say we take a holistic review, what they're suggesting to you is that the metrics are as important or equally important as the attributes, the competencies that someone is bringing to the table. Now, it's very hard to quantify what equal looks like in this case. I think it's a tiny bit subjective based on schools. But in my experience, what I have seen to be true is that someone's attributes or competencies, the who they are part, can absolutely significantly impact the likelihood of them getting into school with or without strong metrics. So in this whole process, I just want you to really keep in mind that it's really important that you focus on developing your whole self, the whole thing, because it's not just the numbers. All right, so this is a question I ask all of my students, and this is a question that I think is really important for you to be able to answer as you navigate this path. Because your answer to this question, when I hear the answer to this question, I can usually figure out pretty quickly where someone is in terms of their competitiveness. And so this is a question I really want you to focus on. The value that you bring to healthcare. Is the value that you bring to healthcare a GPA? No, right? A GPA is only indicative of your ability to handle possibly your ability to handle coursework. A GPA is not really indicative of your ability to handle medical school. What is indicative of your ability to handle medical school? Any guesses? Anybody want to post in the chat? What would actually show a school that you can handle medical school, that would alleviate any concern that you can do this? Does anybody know what that's called? Resilience is what you need in order to accomplish this. You absolutely need resilience. That's an attribute or a competency. Let's say someone has a 3.0, straight up 3.0 GPA. That would cause maybe some concern, but what would they need to have within their grades that would tell a med school, nope, they're good. We don't need anything else. We're good. We believe they can handle this. Upward trend, exactly. So someone's already talked to you about that. Excellent. So an upward trend is basically the last year or 2 years, that's debatable, of coursework. So lots of people have really, really rocky first or second years of college, right? You come to college, you're either a first year, you're a first gen student, you weren't really exposed to some things in high school, or you were, and you came to college and you got really distracted, or you got homesick, or lots of things happen. Lots and lots of things happen when you get to college. For whatever reason, something happened and you didn't transition well. So we have bio and chem series that are all over the place, some C's or worse. OChem hits, doesn't get much better at OChem, so we got some C's in OChem. It's not until you you get past OChem, you get into biochem and physio and genetics, where things start to shape for you. You're like, okay, I got this now. People get better at college the longer they stay and the more energy they put towards figuring out and taking care of a lot of those life issues that get in the way sometimes. Once you take care of all those problems, things tend to get better. You tend to do a little bit better. That usually happens in the third or fourth year. For some people, it happens right at the third year. For some people, it happens right at the fourth year. Some people, it doesn't happen until after they graduate. It doesn't, I mean, in the larger scheme of things, does it really matter if it happens? I mean, it's better if it happens sooner than later. It feels better. It saves you money. But lots and lots of people have challenges throughout college, and lots of people graduate college and have GPAs at the end, even up until the last day, that they're not necessarily proud of. And so there are lots and lots of ways that you can create an upward trend, no matter if it starts happening in your third year, fourth year, or sometimes after. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. The most important thing that you can do for yourself if you want to get past that first screen where they take 2 seconds, they look at some numbers, they scan their eyes down your grade list, they draw a conclusion. Can this person handle med school? Yes or no? You want them to say yes, easily. They got it under control. They took care. They had transition issues. They figured it out. They're taking upper div science coursework. They're doing just fine. They've proven that for about a year. They've taken nothing but science classes and they're doing just fine. No problems. You want them to get past that academic page really, really fast. You want them to get past that because the really good stuff, the heart of who you are, is not in your grades. It's in your competencies, it's in your experiences, in your personal statement, and all of the other writing. So in order for them to get past that, you have to create that upward trend. That's the ticket here. And there are some options for getting to that point. A lot of people, I have a lot of students who get to their third year, fourth year, and they finally figure out, they find their studies, their stride in school. They take care of, having to take care of their family back home. They got their financial situation under control, whatever the thing was, right? They got it under control. So they're finally finding their groove. And they're like, I'm in my fourth year and I don't want to leave. I finally figured this out. For a lot of students, you get financial aid in college. You get either grants, you get the Cal Grant, you get maybe access to federal loans. If you get financial aid in college, and your financial aid will cover a fifth year of college, and your university will allow you to stay, as in you're not over your units and there's something you can do to stay. Sometimes staying a fifth year in college makes a lot of sense, especially if you're getting financial aid. It might seem kind of counterintuitive. You might be saying like, well, I need to get out of college as fast as possible. But keep in mind, college is the only time in your life where you're going to get money to go to college. You're going to get you're going to get grants, you're going to get possible scholarships, you're going to get, you'll have federal loans in your future, but usually interest rates are lower at the undergrad level. So there's a lot of financial benefits to being at the undergrad level. Once you graduate, you lose a lot of those benefits. So if you can look into staying a fifth year, and if you're doing well in your institution, then staying a fifth year and building that upward trend makes a lot of sense. If you're in a really bad place at your institution, let's say you really don't like it there, you're not happy, you're uncomfortable, you just hate it, right? You don't like it. Then staying and trying to make it work if you're not happy doesn't make sense. Sometimes a fresh start is always better. Being in a new place and all of that, it helps psychologically sometimes to start over fresh. So you kind of have to assess that for yourself. But a lot of people do stay a fifth year in college because it makes more sense. And then there's the concept of post-bac. We're going to talk a lot about post-bac today. We're going to talk a little bit about master's degrees too, because those can be tools to help you develop that upward trend. And when we talk about post-bac, we're going to talk about doing it yourself through like a open campus or community college route. We're going to talk about programs. And so we'll go through all of that today. And then the master's degree is, of course, a master's, and we'll go through all those. So some things you want to consider. Every single class that you've ever taken in the history of your whole life is going to go into your AMCAS GPA. Sometimes people take classes in high school or community college before they came to college. All of those courses are going to go in your GPA. If you had taken classes at a community college and then you transferred to Davis and some of those classes didn't transfer with you, all those classes go into your GPA. It doesn't matter if your institution accepted them or not. Every single undergrad course. Let's say you graduate and then you take some more, let's say you go repeat chemistry and OChem at a community college. The original grades stay in your application and then the new grades go in your application. So why is that important? Well, I had told you that most schools set a minimum of a 3.0. And so it's really important because what you want to do if you're applying to a really competitive program is you want to make sure you at least hit the minimum, right? Like that seems like common sense. You want to at least hit the minimum GPA. And then of course you want to try to get as much above that as possible. Now, knowing that it's a little bit challenging once you have a lot of units to raise that GPA really, really fast. Really quick, Mina, I'll answer your question. After you submit your app, no, none of the grades go into your app. Once you hit submit in June, usually June or July, it freezes. So you can, even if you have classes scheduled in fall or the spring semester, they will never go into your AMCAS GPA. So sometimes if you're worried about your GPA, it's actually better to wait and apply a year later so that you have another 2 semesters worth of grades in your application. And a lot of people choose to do that. They choose to take a gap year or 2 gap years or 3 gap years because they need those extra grades in there. And so it's always better to apply when you have the most competitive, in terms of numbers, if you can, the most competitive grades rather than trying and seeing how it's going to work out because it's very expensive to try. So it's much better to wait until you have as much as you can done and then hit submit so that all the courses that you plan on taking are in there. So here's an issue that I ran into a lot when I was the director of admissions at the med school. We would have applicants, and we had a 3.0 minimum to get our secondary. We would have applicants that would call and they'd say, I didn't get a secondary. So I'd look them up and they would have a 2.98 GPA. And I would say, well, you didn't get the secondary because you have a 2.98. Yeah, but I have a PhD. I have a 4.0 in my PhD. And I would say, yeah, I understand that. But our minimum is a 3.0 at the undergraduate level. And that's something you really want to keep in mind, that medical schools have the reporting out. So like their averages on MSAR, what they have to report out to the universe is going to be based on their overall undergraduate GPA. Not the necessarily the science GPA or not the anything else after, they graduate or PhD, but every course you've taken at the undergraduate level is going to go into an overall undergraduate GPA. And that number is what they use for their school average. And so if a school has to, let's say the board of directors has mandated that the dean of admission has a minimum, average of a 3.5 or a 3.6 GPA, and you are applying with a 2.98, well, your 2.98 going into that average GPA is going to pull their average down. They're going to be worried about that, right? They're going to be worried about you being able to do med school now, so they have to maintain their average. So in order for you to be accepted with a lower GPA, you're going to have so much extra stuff. So, so many great stories in your life, so much value that you bring to healthcare that it makes up for it. They're like, you know what? We don't care if this person brings down our GPA because they're so amazing and we can really see the value that they bring to us. But can they take a lot of people in that situation? They really can't. So in that case, you really do have to stand out. Sometimes though, people will go get master's degrees or PhDs thinking it's going to make a difference in that way. And it really doesn't, because it's always the undergrad GPA that they're going to take into consideration. So you can have 4 master's degrees with 4.0s, that undergrad GPA is still going to haunt you. So what do we need to do about that? Here, this is a really, this is not set in stone. This is 100% a hypothetical situation. So I don't want you to leave here going, you must have a 3.2 to get into med school, and this is how you do it. Exactly. No, this is just like, these are some general guidelines to consider. So let's say you finished your undergrad with a 3.2. So 3.2 GPA it's a little bit below average, right? Like we know most med school GPAs are like around a 3.5, but is a 3.2 like completely out of the picture? No, you definitely could still be in the game with a 3.2. Also depends on your MCAT and all the other things, right? Let's say you apply to med school 3.2. It could work out, right? I always say it's a 50% chance for anybody. They're either going to say yes or no. We never know. But let's say you feel like, I have below a 3.2, or I feel like with my 3.2, I'd like to be a little bit more confident, or I don't really have an upward trend. Like I got 3 C's in my last year, even with my 3.2. So if you have 3 C's in your last year, that's not an upward trend. You're going to have to do something about that. So in that case, if you go and do a post-bac program, of course, it's going to raise your overall undergrad GPA. And for post-bac, you have 2 options. You have either a formal, like a formal program, which we're going to talk all about. There are hundreds of those all over the country. Or you could do an informal post-bac where you just take classes after you graduate, and we know that all those classes go into your GPA. If you have above a 3.0, now your 3.0 is, or your 3.2 is probably good enough. I mean, if you have a lot of extra things in your app, you bring a lot of extra value, it's possible that your 3.2 could be good enough for med school. So in that case, some people opt to go ahead and do a master's degree because there are some benefits to doing a master's degree. Some master's degrees have linkages to the med schools. So if you have, let's say there's a med school you really want to go to and they have a master's degree that has a linkage, going to the master's degree actually gives you a little bit of an advantage to getting into that medical school because you're going to spend some time with the med students and with the faculty, and they get to know you. And if you do really well in the master's degree, they already know you can handle it and they like you because you've been there for a year. So it increases your chances of getting in. If you go and do a master's degree in, let's say, a science, let's say you get a master's degree in biochemistry or a master's degree in anatomy, and you spend 2 or 3 years studying these really difficult graduate level science courses and you're doing research while you're doing that, that's going to be really significant. I mean, the amount of science you're going to gain from that master's degree is really going to impress them. And so I've seen in those cases where my 3.2s often are successful at getting into med school when they do a really heavy science program. A public health degree, we're going to go through that. An MPH or some other master's degree, those are a little bit less in terms of proving you can do med school and a little bit more about developing yourself as a person. All of this, though, it's all going to lead you in the same place. So it really doesn't, I mean, it does matter, but you can do a lot of different things to get to the same place. I just want to emphasize that. As long as you know what your options are, it's almost impossible to make a major mistake as long as your GPA is above a 3.0. That's, to me, really, really important. So when we talk about informal post-bac programs, a lot of people need to work after they graduate, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you need to work, what some people do is they'll go get a job as a scribe or an EMT or a medical assistant. And while they're working, they'll plan to work for a couple of years after they graduate. They take the money they're making and they go to community college. And let's say you have a lot of C's in your biochem, physics, and OChem series, you can start retaking some of those courses. Now, people will say to me, yeah, but med schools don't want to see community college courses. They want to see 4-year. No, I think that that's on some level true. But I'm gonna tell you my philosophy on this. Biochem, physics, and OChem are designed to prepare you for the MCAT. Those courses, if you just took biochem, physics, and OChem, those courses do not prove that you can do medical school. Those courses are designed to help you do well on the test. What really proves you can do medical school are courses like physiology, biochemistry, genetics, immunology, cell biology, anatomy. So upper div, more difficult science courses are the ones that med schools are going to pay really close attention to because those are more closely aligned with the courses you're going to take once you get there. If you can't do well on the MCAT, well, you're going to need those basic biochem, physics, and OChem courses just to do well on the MCAT. So it's kind of like assumed you're going to take those for the test. If you got C's in those courses, it might be assumed that you're not going to do so hot on the test because if you haven't really mastered the content in biochem, physics, and OChem the first time you tried, it might be hard to go and try to learn all that stuff on your own while you study for the MCAT. So sometimes taking those courses over at a community college, it serves two purposes. A, it gives you more A's on your list. So if you need to build your GPA, you retake some more science classes and those basic sciences, it builds your GPA slowly, but you're also preparing for the MCAT while you do that because you're reinforcing that content. Every A counts, so it doesn't hurt to take. If you got a C in chemistry, do you need to take it again? You don't technically need to. You don't have to. But let's say you're just trying to build your GPA up right now. Like there are different extremes. If someone comes to me and says, I have a 2.6 GPA, at that point, I would say you're probably not competitive for a formal post-bac. In that case, you might want to go repeat some of the basic sciences just to build your GPA up to like a 2.8. That way you could be a little bit more competitive for a post-bac program. So an informal one is you just go, you take classes, you pay for it out of pocket. You do sometimes get access to grants, which is nice because then it will pay for those as well. You're only going to be able to repeat the lower div coursework. Some community colleges have anatomy, physio, and micro because they're preparing people for nursing. And so you do have those, but eventually you're going to run out of coursework at those schools because they don't have upper div. So the other issue is a lot of times those schools are impacted. Right now we're seeing community colleges being really, really impacted because so many Americans are out of work right now. So a lot of people are going back to school. So that's, I mean, there are definite advantages to going to CCs and just repeating some basic stuff. You're going to save some money. However, like I said, if you really, really need to prove to a med school that you can handle it, you're going to need to take some upper div coursework, and that's probably going to be at a four-year college. You can also access post-bac through a four-year college without applying to a formal program. Almost every university allows open campus coursework, and what this means is you're going and you're taking courses, any course you want, as a non-degree seeking student. So you could go to the local college in your hometown, register for a couple of classes a semester. The catch is you do have to pay out of pocket. You pay per quarter or per unit. So it's about the same price as it would be if you went there, but you don't get any grants or any financial aid to do that. You do get access to upper div science coursework. Sometimes those upper div courses are a little bit less impacted, so it's a little bit easier to get into those courses. But if you need to prove that you can handle med school and you're trying to build your GPA and you can't afford a post-bac and you want to work while you do this, give yourself a goal to do this for 2 or 3 years, work full-time or work 75% time, and take 2 or 3, I would say two classes at a time over a longer period of time. And you'll still accumulate those A's. It'll still build your GPA, but it's going to be a little bit slower. But while you're doing it, you're making a little bit of money and you're gaining all that work experience, that life experience, which makes you very, very competitive. So that's one way you can do it. And a lot of people do it this way. I have a lot of students who I talk to who are a little bit older. They might already have some responsibilities in life and they need to work. And so they're doing it this way. I don't think med schools care if you do it this way. I don't think it looks bad. I think it is what it is. I think people have responsibilities if they have to work. Most med schools will respect that you have to work and you're doing what you can. And it's more about that persistence. It's about not giving up. And as long as you're doing well in the courses and you keep pushing, you keep trying, I think at some point they would like to see that you take a heavy course load. So at some point closer to the end, I personally think it'd be really valuable if you took 3 science classes at one time, just once, just to show that you can do that. I think there's some value in that. So here are some examples. Berkeley has an open campus extension program, and they have only night and weekend courses because they're designed for people who are working. We have at Davis, we have an open campus, but literally every university has this. So you don't have to go to a UC and pay more. Now, let's say you really don't want to take 2 or 3 years to get there. You want to get this over with. You want to, build your GPA as fast as you can. Some things you want to consider. There are different kinds of post-bac programs, and post-bac is a really popular industry right now. And the reason why is because there are so many people who need it. There are many, many people who graduate college who need to build their GPAs. So you're going to find that some programs are representing themselves as post-bac programs, even though they are not necessarily undergraduate post-bac programs. They might be master's degrees, and they're calling themselves post-bac programs now. So it's something you really want to be careful about, because remember what I said, you really need to build that undergrad GPA. So you might be being recruited by a master's degree representing itself as a post-bac program, but you need to make sure it's a record-enhancing undergraduate post-bac if you're worried about your undergrad GPA. Some things you might want to ask, when does it start? A lot of these programs will have multiple entry points. Some start in January, some start in fall, some start all the time. So you just want to make sure that you're thinking ahead in terms of your timeline. And some things you want to ask, do they have strong advising when you get there? Sometimes the reason why people struggle in undergrad is because you try to do it yourself. I've met a lot of students who have a lot of pride, and I was also a first-gen low-income student, and I had way too much pride. I never asked for help. I worked 2 jobs through college, and I suffered in silence, and I was never going to let anyone know how much I struggled day to day in college. And so I understand that with students. And the thing is, though, that there's no need to do that. And advisors are like, we get paid to help you. That's our job. And most of us really want to help you. I'm sure you're going to run across people sometime who are going to be what we call dream crushers, who say rude things or try to discourage you, and we just smile and nod and stay away from them. But for the most part, most advisors and mentors want to help you. So you want to make sure you find a program that has strong advising. You might want more structure. You might want to be around people who are like yourself, who had the same struggles as an undergrad, and you want to have a friend group while you're doing this again who get you. Right? Maybe you felt like in college you were the only one in your classes. You felt very different. Being in a structured cohort puts you around like-minded people. And sometimes you might need to repeat those courses, so it's important to ask, can I repeat my chemistry? Can I repeat my OChem if I need to? Some post-bac programs won't let you repeat coursework. Some do. It really varies. And also some schools or some programs are going to really prep you well for the MCAT or whatever test you need to take if it's the GRE, if you're doing a master's later. Ask about that. Make sure they have a strong test prep program. Ask what the average test scores are for the students completing the program. Just because they partner with a test prep company does not mean it's a quality program. It just means that's who they're paying to teach you. But I would always be a little critical about that. And then make sure if you need access to federal loans or you need access to private loans to fund it, make sure you know how that works. Most post-bac programs do not have any type of funding. Some do, but most don't. Most don't have loans or most don't have scholarships or grants. So you're going to have to take out loans to pay for that. So for all the reasons I just said, those are the or for the benefit, I didn't say this yet. The benefits of doing a post-bac is, like I said, it's faster. You have the strong cohort, you have curriculum, you have advising, you have people who make your schedules for you, all of that. You're not out there doing it by yourself. There are hundreds of post-bac programs. If you want to look some up, go to the AAMC website. The AAMC, I'm sure you've heard about, is the Association of American Medical Colleges. They have a really robust database for post-bac programs. You just Google that and you will find all of them. So I just have here, this is a resource we have for our students, and it's a list of all of the post-bac programs, most of them, many of them. And it kind of gives you an idea of what post-bac programs are looking for. So when we look at minimum GPAs, a lot of programs are going to be between 2.8 and 3.0 in terms of what they're looking for in their applicants. And that makes sense, because if you have a 2.8 and you do 45 or 60 units of science coursework, you should be able to build that up to a 3.0. The expectation in post-bac is that you're always going to get like almost nearly straight A's. That's the expectation. Let's say you have a 3.2. Some of these do want 3.2s. I think it really depends on the extra value that you bring to medicine, whether you need to go spend all that money doing a full post-bac. Some people just feel better doing it, and it's up to every individual. But sometimes when I see people with 3.2s, I wonder if they need to do a post-bac, and maybe applying once and seeing if it goes well first works better than paying, sometimes up to $30,000 to build your GPA. At that point, you might go from a 3.2 to a 3.3, maybe a 3.4, but I'd say the difference between a 3.2 and a 3.3 in the med school application process is not huge. What would get you in with a 3.2 or a 3.3, same boat, would be all the other stuff that you bring to the table, not the fact that you have a 3.3 and the upward trend, of course. So if you don't have an upward trend, if you have a 3.2, if you don't have an upward trend, you would need to do something. But if you have an upward trend, you have 2 years of upward, science coursework, upward science coursework with mostly A's and B's, and you've been doing a lot of really meaningful experiences, and you have a really strong story, and you have a good why medicine, and you know the value that you bring, and you're just really strong in every way, then I would say before you go spend $30,000, check with some schools and see where you are with that. And please feel free to ask questions in the chat. It's really hard for me to keep talking. Like I said, I'm usually very engaged with my audience, and so I feel really odd right now just talking and talking. But please feel free to ask me questions if you have any. So let's shift over to, I get a lot of questions about special master's programs. Oh, I see there's some Q&A here. Sorry, I missed that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I can read them to you, or you can read them yourself.
Oh, I didn't even see the Q&A, but I was looking in the chat. Let me just take a minute and I'll read these, and then we will keep going. It was mentioned they consider all undergraduate courses for your GPA reading, but is it just science courses or other undergrad courses too? So your overall undergrad GPA takes into consideration every class that you took, every single one. So if you took basket weaving in 7th grade, that actually goes into your GPA too. What is subjectively measured though is your ability to take a heavy science course load. So yes, while functionally every course goes into the GPA, they're still humans, and they can still see the courses you took and when you took them and which ones you took when. And they're going to see if you didn't take, like if you took one science class every year, every semester for all of your 4 years, and you never challenged yourself by taking 2 or 3 at the same time, they see that. And a person, and this is a very human process, a person who's reading your app might think that you didn't push yourself in terms of being able to handle a rigorous science course load similar to what you would do in medical school. Carlo asked, you can save this for the end. Oh, sorry, I'm going to go ahead and do it now. I just wanted to get my question into the queue. I worked as a firefighter paramedic for about 8 years, graduated 15 years ago. GPA needs help. Yeah. First of all, you bring tremendous value, Carlo. You're going to, if you can get your GPA where and close enough where it needs to be, you're going to get, everybody's going to want you. So I would say 15 years ago, I would worry more about your readiness for the MCAT, to be honest with you. So I would say take a practice test, take a practice MCAT, and identify which areas of the MCAT are the weakest for you. So if you really don't remember anything from chemistry and OChem, you might go ahead and plan on taking chemistry and OChem again over at a community college. The new MCAT has some other coursework, like you might see a bit of physio on it and some biochem definitely. So you might end up wanting to do some coursework in that. If you really feel like I've been out of school 15 years, I need to get back into the groove of school, then doing a 1-year post-bac program probably wouldn't hurt you. It would give you a lot of that reinforcement coursework. It would give you that 1 year's worth of grades. I don't know. I mean, I'd have to ask a lot of other questions. I couldn't tell you without a lot of information, but if your GPA was below a 3.0, I'd ask how close to it. If you're like way below a 3.0, then you're going to have to maybe do some coursework at a community college and then do a post-bac program. If you're close to a 3.0, then maybe just some reinforcement coursework for the MCAT and doing, really putting a lot of energy into the MCAT can suffice. But I mean, you bring so much value to them that I highly suspect that if you were just at that 3.0 mark, that you would probably be very successful. I read that UC Davis Med School recommends all classes within 5 years if a class ends up being, okay, that is a myth. I don't know who tells people that. I randomly get that question sometimes from my undergrads. That is not true. I have never heard of a med school that requires classes to be done within 5 years. I've been in this industry for 10 years, and that's like a non-existent issue. What GPA would you consider competitive and encourage an undergraduate to apply with for California schools? Okay, I really hate to be the bearer of bad news here. Your GPA and your MCAT do not predict whether you're going to get into a California school. You could have a 3.9 and a 520 MCAT, and I still couldn't tell you if you're going to get into a California school. California schools, all the UCs and some of the newer private schools, they have really specific missions. They all have something they're looking for. And I I literally study my students who get into California schools. And I study the strong ones, my really strong applicants who have really high numbers and did all the right things. Some of those folks don't get into any California schools. Some of them don't get any interviews at any California schools. And they did all the right things. And sometimes I have people who have 3.1s and they get into 2 or 3 UCs. So your numbers alone cannot predict that. If anyone could predict that for you, they would be a millionaire if someone could predict what your chances are of getting into a specific med school. What I really encourage you to do if you're a California applicant is I would make sure you find the funding or apply for the fee assistance program, and make sure you apply to a lot of programs. And by a lot, I mean like 20 to 25. I mean, that's a lot, and I know that's very expensive, and I'm really hesitant to tell people to spend that much money on this process. But in my experience, for my own students, I encourage them to apply to about 20, 25 schools. And I would encourage you to apply to a lot of out-of-state schools. And when you're picking schools, you can't pick schools based on your metrics. That's the worst way to pick schools. Now, you have to use some common sense, right? You can't pick all California schools and all Ivy League schools. You've got to balance it out with a lot of schools that are within your range if we're using metrics, but also schools that are just really good fit for you in terms of who you are and the value that you bring. And so what do I mean by that? Let's say you are able to speak Spanish. There are many schools across the United States that have student-run clinics that serve Spanish-speaking communities. Find those schools. They're usually going to be in more urban settings, but not always. There could be some rural communities. And find the schools, find the clinic names, and apply to those schools and write your secondaries that share with the school how you can connect with that community, how you bring value to them. That's actually what's going to get you into med school, not your numbers. It's the value that you bring. Anonymous asks, what are my thoughts on BSMD programs? Well, funny, I used to run the admissions process for the BSMD program at the med school I worked at in New York. I think they can work out well for students who 100% know that they're going to be doctors at age 17 or 18. I am a little worried about someone's committing, like just knowing 100% that at such a young age, but I assume some people do know that. I would say the people who I've seen get into BSMD programs have done significant things in high school, things that I didn't even know were possible in high school. These people tend to be very, very well prepped. Now, I don't know if any of you are in high school and that's what you're thinking, but I would just say usually you have to commit to one school for your whole, the whole journey from beginning to end. There are many, many schools out there, many med schools that most people don't know about until they get into the application process. So if it were my own child, I probably would not send my own child into a BSMD program. I would encourage them to explore because you don't know what you're going to want to do. You don't know what your passions are until you live life a little bit, but that's just me. So let's see. If you did a post-bac, then your classes will count towards your undergrad GPA. That is correct, as long as it's an undergraduate post-bac. Like I said, some of these master's programs, like the one I was just about to talk about, the SMPs, they're representing themselves as post-bac programs. And that's really problematic because, like I said, if you have a 2.99 and a 4.0 in a master's degree, some schools are not going to automatically send you that secondary because they screen on the undergrad GPA. All right, so next question. Do medical schools accept C minuses as passing grades? I earned 2 C minuses and taking upper div. Yes, so no, medical schools do not usually accept C minuses as prereqs. So if you have a C minus, I would encourage you to repeat that. However, it's not 100% that you need to repeat it before you apply. You can always repeat it while you're applying. You don't need to have all of your prereqs done by the time you hit submit. You have to have your prereqs done by the time you matriculate at the medical school. And so the reason why you might wait and take it, let's say in the fall or the spring semester of the year that you're applying to medical school, is medical school requirements vary drastically. There are med schools that don't even have prereqs. So let's say hypothetically, you apply to 25 schools and you get 5 interviews. That'd be a really successful cycle. Of those 5, I mean, even though you apply to 25 schools, it's actually only the 5 schools you get interviews at that you really need to worry about at this point in terms of meeting their requirements. So at that point, you would look up the 5 schools. You'd already have all this tracked on a spreadsheet, but you would look at the 5 schools and you would say, which of these 5 schools requires that I have a C or better in chemistry? And let's say 3 of them do. And you would know. You would get an interview, you would get waitlisted. If you get waitlisted at one of those schools, you better go take the class, right? Because you have a pretty good chance of getting into that school if you're waitlisted. If you do all, there's a lot of things go into that. But at that point, if you're waitlisted, you better plan to get into the school and take the class over. Now, let's say you get accepted or interviewed at a school that does not require any prereqs, and they're willing to accept your C-. Can you technically get into med school with the C-? I have to say yes, you can technically get into med school with the C-, but when you're applying broadly to 30 schools, 25, 30 schools, it might make you feel better to not have to worry about it and take it over. So just my 2 cents there. When it comes to the non-science master degree programs, what would medical schools dismiss upward trend in MSN or MA? Well, I don't think getting a nursing degree is the best way to prepare for medical school, but MPH programs are definitely really popular for that. And I would say if you're going to get an MPH, you need to have already proven on paper that you can handle science courses. So before you get an MPH, you want to make sure your undergrad GPA is in order. So at least, let's say 3.2, let's just throw that out there as a baseline. And you want to make sure you've taken a lot of upper div science coursework that you can prove you've done well in. If you've done that, you've taken upper div science coursework, you've proven you can handle it, you have an upward trend, you have that GPA that's over that 3.0 mark, then at that point, doing a master's degree is perfectly fine because you already met the threshold for them to decide if you can handle medical school. MPHs don't prove you can handle medical school. MPHs show on paper what you're really passionate about. It shows that you have an interest in an area. So it doesn't have to be an MPH. Let's say it's a nutrition program. A lot of pre-meds do nutrition programs, masters in nutrition. It could be a bioinformatics. It could be an MBA. A lot of people don't realize that MBAs are really valuable for medical school. It could be all kinds of things. But yeah, you wouldn't go get an MBA if you had an undergrad GPA of 2.8, right? That wouldn't be helpful. You need to do the science stuff first, and then you can tack on the MBA. Let's see here. You mentioned GPA cutoffs that some schools have. Do schools have individual section cutoffs for the MCAT if one section is lower than the rest? Back in the old days when we used the old MCAT, it used to be that they said a 7 in the verbal was indicative of problems in medical school. And that was based on years of research that they did analyzing verbal reasoning scores against board scores and success rates in medical school. The new MCAT's been out for 5 years now. And to be honest with you, I'm sure that people are doing this research and I need to probably do a little bit more work digging that up, but I haven't seen, it hasn't been shared with me what the number is to indicate that you really can't handle medical school. I have a theory in my head that below a 124 on the CARS is probably going to be problematic. Most schools are going to want a 125 on most things, but CARS typically is lower, is the lowest section for most people. That's pretty common. If you have below a 125 and at least, like, let's just say 2 of the sections, I probably would be concerned and I would say you might want to retake the MCAT. But that's just my opinion. I'm not basing that on any study I've read or anything. I think that generally it's more about your overall score. And then I'm assuming that a lot of med schools who used to put a lot of emphasis on the verbal reasoning section are transferring that theory over to CARS. That's my guess. So without having any, valid research to look at right now, it's hard to know what that answer is. Prerequisite courses are recommended to be completed within 5 years. Oh, you're quoting something. Yeah, I see that you cite me on that. I have actually talked to Charlene Green, who's the director of admissions at the School of Medicine. I talk to her all the time, and she says that's not true. So I can tell her to change her website, but all I can say is I work at UC Davis and I talk to her all the time, and I have my own undergrads who ask that question, and it's not an issue. But you're welcome to take them again if you'd like. If it's been more than 5 years and you want to take it again, go ahead. It can't hurt you, right? If you take it again, you'll just have extra classes on your GPA. Let's see, if you have a 3.5 overall GPA and you have completed about 35 units of Post-Bac with 4.0, would you still recommend doing a formal Post-Bac or S&P? No. So if I'm reading this right, you have a 3.5 overall GPA and you have a 4.0 in your Post-Bac? No, I think you should go ahead and apply. Again, I don't know what your AMCAS score is, and I think you probably want to apply widely. I don't think that a 3.5 is a bad GPA by any stretch of the imagination. So I think depending on the value that you bring, I don't know anything else about you besides your GPA, so I couldn't tell you if you're competitive or not. I can't tell if someone's competitive for med school until I have a conversation with them, because numbers alone don't predict your chances of getting into med school. What do you recommend to do if you finish your undergrad with a very good GPA and everything else checks out? Well, you would, if you have a really good GPA, then you don't need to pursue anything unless you want to. So if you have what we call a really good GPA, then I would say you need to take the MCAT and go ahead and apply to med school. If you want to do a master's degree, then you can if you want to, but lots of people get into med school without master's degrees. You wouldn't do a master's degree just to look good to a med school. That's like that. That's the worst reason to do anything. If you're asking yourself questions like, what do med schools want to see? Should I do this or should I do this? Med schools don't care what you do. They're not like, they don't have a prescriptive formula for the right kind of person. They really are looking at every single person going, what can this person do for us? If we bring them here, how can they contribute to our institution? Can they contribute through research? Can they contribute through our community? Are they going to contribute to our student body? Are they going to be the next president of our student class? Like, what does this person bring? And your ability to articulate that value isn't going to come through in your grades. It's going to come through in your stories, in your personal statement, your disadvantage statement, your secondary writing, all of the pieces that are a lot more subjective. So if you have a good GPA, and you don't need to do anything unless you want to prove, you want to show, I shouldn't say prove, you want to show somebody something else you care about. So if you really care about nutrition, do a master's degree in nutrition to show them how much you care about that. I graduated from Fresno and took 1 semester of Gen Chem, Anatomy, Microbiology. Due to financial reasons, I opted for an informal post-bac. If I complete all the required prereqs at a CC and do well, would you recommend taking additional upper level science courses at a 4-year? So the only courses I would recommend you take before you take the MCAT, I would recommend you take biochem. If you needed, like let's say you just wanted to take 3 or 4 upper div science courses, which I don't think is a terrible idea, I would take biochem, genetics, cell bio, and you said you took physio already. Yeah. I think those would be the 3 that would be most fruitful for you on the MCAT. If you were just taking science courses and haven't taken the MCAT yet, you're going to see a tiny bit of that content on the MCAT. So having that reinforced in those upper div science courses could be valuable. I went to UC Davis years ago and withdrew and went to community college for a fall semester and then transferred to another 4-year. Unfortunately, my GPA at Davis has lowered my CUME. Any advice to overcome this? Yeah, if you've been doing really well as in your more recent years, there's nothing we can do about early years in our life coming back and haunting us and pulling down an overall undergrad GPA. That happens all the time. But here's the thing. If you are non-traditional, and it sounds like you might be, it sounds like you kind of took a little bit longer to get to where you are in terms of being ready to apply to med school. So you say years ago, that means you must be older. And older people bring a tremendous amount of value to medical school application. The older you are, the more valuable you are. So I would say, don't worry if your early GPA brings down your overall, because there's probably things you make up for that. It seems like we might be out of time. Am I right?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
We are out of time. But I want to thank you so much, Joanne. This was a really great session full of great information. I did have a couple of people ask if your slides would be shared, and I wasn't sure. We are recording, so we will have the recording, but that's completely your choice.
I can absolutely, where should I share it to?
I'll have you email them to me, and
Okay,
I'll reach out to you.
sounds great.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. I want to let everybody know that we